June 5, 1944. Just after 10 at night, the wind still worried the channel. Low clouds dragged over southern England. The sea looked bruised, wet, heavy, restless. In the roads and anchorages, ships waited in layers. Gray hulls, blacked-out decks, ramps chained shut, cargo nets hanging still. A listener on shore would have heard engines muttering in the dark, winches testing their nerves, chains rubbing metal, men coughing into cold sleeves. Then the signal moved. Slow at first. Then, everywhere, the convoy began to breathe. German naval officers had spent years studying convoys. They measured columns, counted escorts, estimated speed. They believed size created weakness. A larger convoy meant more noise, more smoke, more confusion, more targets trapped together on one obedient road. That had once been true. In the bitter Atlantic years, a convoy could look like a moving graveyard, but by the summer of 1944, Dwight Eisenhower was no longer fighting the last convoy war. He was building something else. Not merely an invasion, a machine of replacement. A structure of excess, a method so deep that sinkings could not starve it. That is the undertold part. Not the beaches alone, not the speeches, not the weather delay. The real answer lay behind the armada, in warehouses, in rail yards, in prestowed cargo ships, in amphibious trucks, in improvised harbors, in the plain old cargo net. That net is easy to miss. It swung between dock and deck. It lowered crates, shells, tires, canned meat, radio parts, and blood plasma. It carried the dull objects that win wars slowly. It was not handsome. It did not fire a shot. But again and again, the cargo net kept descending. Karl Dönitz and his U-boat service still hoped to make the sea decisive. On invasion day, there were 61 U-boats in Biscay ports. 49 were the old 500-ton boats. They were not built for this close defensive battle. They were Atlantic hunters pressed into coastal desperation. Their newer underwater weapons were not ready in time. Their small coastal designs had come too late. Their answer was the snorkel, a breathing tube for submerged travel, a promise more than a solution. The Germans believed the invasion lanes would offer rich prey, yet even on the morning of the landings, the U-boat was absent from the channel. That absence mattered. It was more than bad timing. It was proof that Eisenhower and his naval partners had already changed the environment. They had wrapped the crossing in air patrols, destroyers, corvettes, minesweepers, motor launches, deception plans, and relentless intelligence. German commanders still expected the decisive blow. They just could not place it. Hitler feared Norway, then Normandy, then Pas-de-Calais. Dönitz feared Biscay, then the Channel, then some second landings still to come. Uncertainty was eating command before the first torpedo left its tube. Eisenhower understood that confusion alone was not enough. He needed mass. He needed Britain turned into a loaded spring. He needed a stockpile so dense that one sunken ship became an accounting problem, not a strategic crisis. So he accepted the sight that German submariners thought they understood. Endless columns, endless hulls, endless nets of cargo. He made the convoys larger because he intended the whole theater to become unsinkable. Months before June, the true counterstroke had already begun. It was called Operation Bolero. The name sounded almost delicate. The reality was iron. In the first 5 months of 1944 alone, American strength in Britain doubled. It rose from roughly 774,000 men in December to 1,526,965 by the end of May. 20 divisions had reached the islands. More telling still, the support troops came in staggering numbers. Over 459,000 men belonged to the services of supply. Nearly 500,000 Americans were there to move, stack, issue, repair, count, weld, pave, and deliver. That ratio offended some fighting men. Eisenhower kept it. He knew an army that outran its supplies became a rumor. In those same 5 months, more than 2,200,000 long tons of cargo were received for American forces in Britain. That was about 40% of all American tonnage discharged there across 2.5 years. Imagine the pressure on docks, on sidings, on roads, on clerks, on crane operators, on the cargo net itself. Day after day it came down. Crates of artillery shells, spare engines, medical chests, engineer tools, tentage, fuel containers, rations in ugly boxes, the sort of cargo no statue commemorates. Eisenhower did not manage those details personally. No supreme commander could. What he did was more important. He empowered them. He protected the system that carried them. He backed men who thought in tonnage and timing. One of the most important was General John Clifford Hodges Lee. Lee was not loved. He was vain to some, difficult to many, tireless to all. Yet he grasped the plain truth. The invasion would not be decided only at the waterline. It would be decided by what stood behind the waterline. Lee's empire of depots, ports, railheads, camps, and repair parks turned Britain into a magazine of war. One convoy in March showed the scale. 18 fully loaded American Army cargo ships arrived with another 24 partial cargoes on regular commercial vessels. That single movement carried about 1,500 wheeled vehicles, tanks, and self-propelled guns. It carried 2,000 cased vehicles. It carried 200 aircraft and gliders. It carried about 50,000 tons of supplies. All of it had to be cleared in roughly 8 days. To empty those holds was only the beginning. To prevent paralysis, that cargo had to vanish inland almost at once. It required 75 special trains and 10,000 loaded rail cars. Weekly movements demanded at least 100 special freight trains, and between 18,000 and 20,000 loaded cars. This was not glamour. It was pulse. It was circulation. The cargo net dropped. The train departed. The berth cleared. Another ship slid in. German submarine officers were trained to think in sinkings. 1 ship, 2 ships, a convoy mauled, a tonnage score. Eisenhower's answer was to think in systems. A ship sunk at sea mattered less if the island behind it was already swollen with reserves. A port choked mattered less if cargo could be redirected. A schedule broken mattered less if other schedules overlapped it. This was not elegance. It was redundancy. It was democracy expressed as inventory. Then came one of the least celebrated ideas of the campaign: prestowage, type loading, floating warehouses disguised as ordinary shipping. Lee pressed for it in January. Ships would not carry just random stacks for British ports. They would be loaded as organized blocks for the continent itself. Subsistence, clothing, ordnance, landing mats, ammunition. Each ship became a temporary depot. After unloading what Britain needed on deck, some vessels could wait for the continent and be discharged there as required. It saved repeated handling. It reduced congestion. It bought time. 54 prestowed ships were prepared, along with ammunition loads and commodity carriers totaling roughly 500,000 measurement tons. That was Eisenhower's kind of answer. Not a theatrical gesture, a change in architecture. U-boat captains could picture a fat convoy. They had more trouble picturing a fleet that functioned as storage. More trouble picturing ships as extensions of warehouses. More trouble picturing victory not as a beachhead seized, but as a stream sustained. There was another hard truth behind the buildup. British ports and rail lines were nearing strain. Southern berths had to be sterilized for the invasion. Coastal shipping had to be refitted. Civilian labor was limited. Military labor was pulled away for operations. Yet the flood continued. In March, a record monthly delivery arrived. In April, it rose again. In May, more than 600,000 long tons were received for American forces. Britain became crowded with gasoline drums, replacement tanks, artillery tractors, folded pontons, medical stores, and mountain ranges of ration boxes. It also became crowded with silence. Thousands of men waited in sealed camps. Trucks stood hood to hood. Landing craft jammed creeks and estuaries. The Germans saw signs. They did not see the full shape. Dönitz had 61 U-boats in Biscay on invasion day. Within 48 hours, 36 500-ton boats put to sea from French ports. That sounds impressive. It was not. 30 of them were sent to patrol the Biscay approaches. Only 6 snorkel boats were sent to attack invasion convoys in the Channel. That ratio tells the story. German command still feared another landing elsewhere. It could not fully commit. It still doubted the main blow. Even after the beaches were burning, It was guarding ghosts. Meanwhile, the invasion lanes kept filling. Minesweepers had already gone out first, carving paths through the dark. Escorts layered the routes. Aircraft prowled overhead. Shore-based radar watched. Destroyers listened. The channel had been turned into a defended corridor. Once German submarines reached it, they found movement difficult and attack even harder. One boat, U-963, reported 3 air attacks in less than 2 hours on the 7th of June. That was the new arithmetic. A submarine surfaced to charge batteries, and aircraft came. It changed course, and another threat appeared. It tried to creep east, and destroyers were waiting. The grand hunt became a crawl under blows. German signals grew grim. A message sent to the crews captured the desperation. A U-boat that inflicted losses during the landing, command said, had fulfilled its supreme task, even if it achieved nothing more, even if it did not return. There is something almost funereal in that line. It admitted the odds without admitting defeat. By the middle of June, non-snorkel boats were being pulled back because Allied anti-submarine pressure was too severe. The U-boat had not been destroyed in a single dramatic climax. It had been crowded, tracked, delayed, and made clumsy. That was enough. Yet Eisenhower still faced a brutal danger. The Germans had wrecked Cherbourg's harbor with professional thoroughness. Quays were blasted, cranes destroyed, entrances blocked with sunken ships, breakwaters damaged, power and control systems ruined. The American engineer who surveyed it called the demolition the most complete he had ever seen. That meant the Allies would have to live over the beaches longer than planned. This is where the story deepens, because now the answer to U-boat laughter became even stranger. Eisenhower's machine did not shrink after landfall. It improvised another mouth to feed itself. The mulberry harbors were part of that plan. Artificial breakwaters, floating piers, roadways reaching from ship to shore. The British had pressed the concept early. If a port could not be captured intact, one had to be brought across the sea. The Americans were cautious about it. Then necessity made believers of everyone. Mulberry A off Omaha and Mulberry B in the British sector began work in June. Offload times improved sharply. Larger craft no longer had to wait so helplessly on the tide. Vehicles rolled over whale roadways. Ships discharged into a temporary port built from concrete, steel, and stubbornness. Again, the humble image returned. The cargo net swinging down over water, still descending. Then the storm came. June 19th through the 21st. A severe channel storm. The sea that had permitted invasion now attacked the invader. The American Mulberry was shattered. Breakwaters tore loose. Floating sections broke. Causeways failed. Smaller vessels smashed against one another. Mulberry A was beyond repair. For a moment, this looked like the kind of blow German planners had wanted the ocean to deliver for them. But the system held. That is the heart of this story. Eisenhower's answer was never one harbor, never one convoy, never one trick. It was layers. After the storm, 1,500 soldiers went to work clearing Omaha. Every available landing ship tank, landing craft tank, amphibious truck, rhino ferry, pontoon, and beach party was pulled into the effort. They dragged wrecks away, reopened channels, rebuilt routines. The sea had wrecked the harbor. The cargo net came down anyway. And then something almost unbelievable happened. The open beaches began outperforming expectations. After operations resumed on the 23rd of June, Utah handled about 6,400 tons in a day. Omaha handled 10,000. In just over a week after the storm, the 2 American beaches processed more than 161,000 tons of supplies. By the end of June, the total reached 298,827 tons. Omaha averaged roughly 13,500 tons a day. Utah averaged about 7,000. Both exceeded planned capacity. The machine had taken a blow and answered by working harder. By June 30th, 452,460 troops had come ashore, along with enough supplies and equipment to keep the lodgment alive. Not every target was met. Not every schedule held. But the bridgehead did not starve. The beaches did not empty. The armies did not stop. German submarines, meanwhile, were bleeding for almost nothing. By the end of June, a dozen U-boats had been sunk with little to show. Across the Channel campaign of June, July, and August, nearly half of the boats attempting those operations were lost. They had prepared to attack shipping. Instead, they were swallowed by a defended logistics system larger than their doctrine. This is why the image of the cargo net matters. A torpedo is dramatic. A cargo net is not. Yet one represented German hope in a single violent stroke. The other represented Allied power in endless repetition. One weapon sought a kill. The other kept lowering replacements into the war. Tank treads, telephone wire, pontoon sections, diesel pumps, morphine, flour, tires, fuel, bridge panels, radio valves, bulldozer parts. Freedom arrived in many forms. Often it arrived in a stained sling of rope and steel. Eisenhower did not answer submarine contempt with prideful speeches. He answered with depth, with accumulation, with the hard, almost boring decision to bring too much rather than barely enough. He accepted the burden of supporting armies with almost architectural seriousness. He trusted that if the structure behind the front was broad enough, courage at the front would not be wasted. That is the larger truth left by those convoy lanes. Victory was not only destructive, it was constructive. It was laid down in timetables, depot maps, pier plans, rail allocations, and loading tables. It was assembled by men whose names were never carved into the legend of the beaches. Stevedores, railway planners, CB builders, truck drivers, winch operators, beachmasters, clerks with clipboards damp from spray. They built the conditions in which battlefield heroism could matter. So when German U-boat captains looked out and saw immense American convoys, they thought they were seeing appetite. They thought they were seeing excess. They thought they were seeing a target too large to hide. Eisenhower saw something else. He saw insurance. He saw resilience. He saw a nation so industrially alive that it could transform vulnerability into mass and mass into certainty. The convoy was not merely carrying an army. It was carrying a whole design for staying power. And in that design, the most unglamorous things often mattered most. Not the grand cruiser alone, not the celebrated paratrooper alone, but the train schedule met on time, the beach cleared before dawn, the replacement engine found before noon, the ration crate opened at dusk, the cargo net lowered one more time. In the end, that is how freedom crossed the water. Not as a single blow, not as a single ship, but as a patient structure of men and material, built wide enough to survive weather, steel, fire, and doubt. Eisenhower gave them a continent in motion.